Today I'd like to talk to you about form validation. So what I have on the left side of the screen here is a simple little web page with some form elements, some input types that are text and password, and actually, wait a minute, did I make that a password? Yep, that's password. And a select menu and some checkboxes and radio buttons and a submit button. And then on the right, I have the script that checks that form to make sure that all of the elements in the form have been completed before the form is allowed to be submitted. Now, normally, the default behavior of a submit button is to follow the form's action and send this data off to another script to be processed. If I were to close up this script and look for the form tag, there's an action tag or an action attribute right there that is currently empty and not doing anything because I don't have a script to process this data with. I just wanted to focus on validating the fact that the data was complete for now. But in a fully functional website, that would actually have the name of file sitting right there. Anyway, let's reopen this script. Let's see what happens. Here I have the form. I have filled out nothing. I'm going to submit that form. Now I have a lot of errors on the screen telling me that I must enter a name, an email, I must enter a password, I must pick an option, I must check some boxes, so on and so forth. If I start doing some of these things, like checking that radio button, grabbing a box, picking an option, and then try submit, you will notice that several of those errors went away. If I keep adding even more, let's say I put that in there. I'm going to leave the email blank. I'm going to create a password and put a different password there, even though it says confirm. I'm going to submit. Now the name error went away. The email error is still there. The password has a different error now. The two passwords don't match. So that's important. You got to make them match. Now submit, and that goes away. And the email address is going to generate an entirely different thing. So if I just put Rick, we're going to get some browser interference, I would say here. Browsers never used to do this. This is kind of handy, I suppose, but not for what I'm trying to demonstrate. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that I didn't put in an email address, but before my script even got to it, the browser threw an error on there, which blocked my script from functioning. So let's see if we can do a little bit more. There's a Rick at and a dot, and yep, didn't work. Dot C. Still didn't work. Whoops, did not mean to go full screen. Big fingers. My apologies. Rick at C there. That'll work. Okay, so now the browser has stopped bugging me about this not being a valid email address. And yet we still have an error saying it's not a valid email address. And that's because, as you know, most email addresses are going to be something at something, castle.com or a .org or what have you. Once I do that and submit, now I get this little pop-up. If this was going to be processed by a PHP script, then we'd be done. That data would be gone. And it says, take a look at that address bar. See what's going on. What would that data look like? So my form has been cleared because the data has been submitted. Now I will go full screen. No, I won't because the address bar disappears. I'll open it up this way. Here is the HTML file that I was just looking at. myform.html. So what the heck is all the rest of this? That is the data. That's how that data is getting transmitted over the internet to another script to handle it. And so after the question mark, that's where the data starts. And it starts with a variable name and a value. And then there's an ampersand followed by another variable name and another value. And this value includes some weird characters. Those are URL encoding characters. They're similar to special characters, but not quite the same. But yes, that %40 represents an ampersand. If you recognize that when I typed in my email address, I typed rick@castle.com, that's the @ symbol right there. And then we have another ampersand. We have the password equals. Now you can see what I typed in for my password. Another ampersand. The confirmed password was again A to make sure they matched so that it was successful. Another ampersand. More variables. Their values. Variables. Their values. Now, the checks are interesting because the checks are not going across as just a variable name and a value. Going across as a variable name with a couple of square brackets. If the encoding was not happening, it would look like that, or maybe a little bit easier to recognize like that. And that is because there are multiple checkboxes here, and the user could have selected all of them. And therefore, what could be sent could be 0, 1, 2, or 3 different values up here. And we want those stored in an array. So the square brackets there represent the array. And then we have one more value and one more variable name for the radio buttons. And they're not like the checkboxes because the radio buttons actually can only be, one of them can only be selected at a time. If I choose this one and then this one, it deselects the first one. So there's only ever one value that comes from the radio button. So that works just like the others. Now, let's get into the script and see how I'm doing all of that. Or get into the code, I should say, because I'm actually going to hide the script again. Because it all starts right here with this onSubmit. And onSubmit runs some JavaScript for us. onSubmit typically is going to try to submit the form. It's actually going to onSubmit, do the action. But what we're saying is onSubmit, we are going to return either a true or a false. If it returns true, then yep, it's going to submit. If it returns false, it's not going to submit. So that's how we can prevent that form from being submitted if there are errors. And what's going to control our true or false? That would be the check form function. And one more thing I'll show you here in this form. The method is very important. Things will not send properly if you do not, will not send at all if you do not have a method in your form tag. And those two options are either get or post. The difference being get is visible in the URL, just like we were looking at up there. So you can see that data, you can troubleshoot that data, you can understand how it's being formatted as it's traveling. But that's limited to 256 characters. Whereas post is completely invisible. It does not end up in the URL at all. It does not have the 256 character limit. And it's great for many, many uses, such as usernames and passwords, where you don't want them posted in the address bar. But it's not so good for things that you might want your users to be able to bookmark or share. Just a quick example of where those things are being used every day. Think of a basic Google search. Search for anything. I will search for cat. Look at the address bar even before the search comes up. We're on a Google search page, but there's your question mark. And there's the first variable, q equals cat. And OQ equals cat. And whatever that is equals whatever this is. So I'm not sure what kind of data Google is collecting and passing along. I'm also not sure why this is taking so long to do a Google search for cats, but that's another question. So if things need to be bookmarkable, shareable, turned into an instant link that will get you right back to that page, get might be your better option. Anywho, from there, if I scroll down through, you will notice that I have input types, and all of my input types have names and IDs. And then I have divs right underneath them. And as you can guess from the ID in the div, it's name error message, class error message. I'm going to do the same thing down below. Here's the email, name ID, with right below it, email error message, class error message. And that is so I can identify those things and pull the values from them. And also so I have a place to post the error message by just tweaking the inner HTML of a div that's already on the page. Now let's go take a look at the script itself. So here's the check form function. And what I've got right at the top are just a collection of variables that point to the values that I'm going to need to use in a long series of if statements down below, where we're checking to see if they've been filled in. So I tried to collect those all up front. Name equals, go ahead and grab an element by its ID, name, and grab the value. Email, same way. ID, email, value. Password, same way. Confirm password, same way. Options, same way. That's for the drop-down menu. Then we get to the checks. Those checkboxes, as I said earlier, are different. They have to create an array, and it's a multi-step process to get these checkboxes. The first thing I'm going to do is use a totally new command for us, which is query selector all, which then allows me to select everything on the page that uses an input tag and that uses the attribute of checkbox. So that lets me grab all of the checkboxes at once. It doesn't get their values, it just gets all of the individual boxes. So I don't have to set up an ID for each and every one of them. If you only have a couple of boxes on the page, it's probably quicker to set up the IDs. But if you have 100 boxes on the page, this would be way quicker. So keep that in mind as you're doing this. Sometimes this is very, very handy. Sometimes, not so much. Anyway, once I have them all collected, I need to build a new empty array. And that empty array is going to store the values of all of the different checkboxes once we do start reading them. And then as far as reading them goes, we need a for loop, because we need to loop through this collection of checkboxes, which is an array. So we're going to be accessing it with the square brackets and the counter for the for loop, which in our case is I. And what we're going to do is we're going to set I up to be 0. We're going to make sure that if I is less than the check's length, and there's checks with our collection of boxes, and its length will be automatically calculated. So if there's 2 boxes, it knows it's 2. If it's 3, it's 3. If it's 100, it's 100. And then every time it goes through, I is going to go up by 1. And all we have in here is an if statement that says if that particular checkbox is checked. So that's how you check to see if a checkbox is checked. With JavaScript is the name or ID of the checkbox dot checked. That'll be true if it is, false if it's not. So if it's checked, then we're going to work with the checked values array, which remember is empty, and we're going to push in the value that was stored in the checked checkbox. And if we go down through, I can get there faster. I think I can. There we go. There are the checkboxes right there, the inputs. There's the name, checks. There's the square brackets that are part of the name, and each of them has a value. So we got box 1, box 2, box 3. You got them all right there. And so it's not good enough to know that I'm working with an individual checkbox. I also need to know what value was stored in that box, and that's how we do that. That's what that's doing. So if something was checked, it's going to end up in this array. If nothing was checked, that array started empty, and it's going to stay empty. That's going to be important later on. And then we have the radio buttons. I have a variable for the radio buttons, and that is similar to the others up above. We're going to go get it and then grab the value from it. The difference here is instead of using getElement by ID, we're using the document.myForm. MyForm is the name that I applied to the form. The form tag says form, name equals myForm. And then the radio buttons say input type equals radio, name equals radio. And the reason for that is the radio buttons all share the same name, so that no matter which one you click, any others with the same name will be deselected at the same time. And that's what makes that work. And therefore, we only need to get the one value. It will automatically return whichever one is selected and ignore the others that are not selected. That's the only difference there. Once I've got those variables set up, I have a series of basically failures. So all of these are different checks that I'm going to do with if statements down below that I'm setting to false initially. So is the name complete? No, it's not. False. Is the email complete? No, it's not. False. All the way down through. And that's how this form is going to start. We're automatically going to believe that nothing has been filled out, that you have an empty form, which is exactly what you start with. Then we have a series of if statements. Here we go. We're checking name. Is name blank? Then we're going to go grab the name error message by its ID, change that in our HTML, and make sure it displays this message. You must enter a name. And then else, well, change something from up above. Remember those failures we set up initially? Well, change one, make it true. So name complete would now be true instead of false. And later, when we get to the end of the script, we'll check all of these again and make sure that they're all true before submitting. But anyway, change name complete equal to true and clear that error message. Just wipe it out. Error message should be gone. So enter HTML to just a blank set of quotes. Next, we do the same thing to the email, and then we do something different. So email starts exactly the same. If it's blank, you must enter. And then we get this thing here. And this is a regular expression. And so what's happening here is a regular expression is a pattern. And we're checking to see if what they've entered in that email matches the pattern. So this is the beginning of the pattern right here. And this is the end of the pattern over here. And so what's in between is the actual pattern. And this exclamation point is not part of the pattern. That is just the same. That is not equal. So that's what you would normally see in a lot of different if statements. Not some variable or not equal to some variable. That's what that is. And so if we look at the pattern, this says that our line is going to begin with a character. And it doesn't matter if the character is uppercase or lowercase. But the plus after it means it could be any number of characters. So our email address has to begin with any number of characters. And then that's going to be followed by the @ symbol, which is then followed by, again, this should look familiar, any number of characters, which is then followed by the, I don't want to drag that around, the period or the dot. This slash in front of the dot is to escape the dot, so the JavaScript will ignore it and not treat it like some part of a command and just treat it like the dot we want it to be. So what we have now is some characters, an @ symbol, some more characters, a dot, and then, oh, guess what? Here it is again. Some more characters that are going to be at the end of our pattern. So start with characters, end with characters, make sure there's an @ and a dot somewhere in the middle. And then what we're going to do is use this test method on the email. So we have already determined that the email is not blank with the if statement. We're in the else if. So now we're going to test the email against this pattern to make sure it matches. If it doesn't match, we get the error about the valid email, not the blank email. And then we have one more else. And that would be if it passed both of those, then email autocomplete is going to be set to true. And we're going to blank that error message in case there was one there. Now we're going to go back to something that looks a little bit more normal. We've got our password, check to make sure it's blank, display the error message if it is. If not, clear the error message and set password complete to true. Here we have something a little bit different. We're checking password and we're seeing if it's not equal to the other password. So remember, there's password and confirm password. And if those two don't match, then we're going to get a new error message that says the two passwords that you entered don't match. And so that's how we're handling the password and password confirm. Otherwise, we're setting it to true and we're clearing the error message. We get down to options, and if no options were chosen, there's an error message. Otherwise, options are set to true. And we get to check values length. Wait a minute, that's new. What's going on there? You have to remember something here. Check values was an array, and that array was set to, whoops, hang on a second. Sorry about the phone interruption. Okay, so if you recall, check values were, or was an array storing all of the values that were selected in the checkboxes. And so if the length of that array is 0, that means there are no values in it. The only way there would be no values is if they didn't check a box. And therefore, we can tell them they must check a box. At this point, we don't care what those values are. We just want to make sure there are some there. Otherwise, checks complete and clear the error message. And then we get down to radio, and it's the same thing. Is it blank? There's your error message. Is it not blank? There's your set to true, and there's your clear the message. This is all part of the file that you have in Google Classroom. And this would let you just see what options and checks values and radio look like if you wanted to, or throw any of the others in there if you wanted to. Just something to help you visualize the data as it's coming through. Finally, we have the final check. We've checked every form element on this page. Now we have to decide whether or not they're allowed to submit. And that's this one big final if statement right here. So we are checking name complete, email complete, password complete. We're checking them all. Remember the ampersands, the double ampersands mean and in JavaScript. And so is name complete and email complete and password complete and all the rest of them. It keeps going. All the way down to radio complete. If those are all true, then form complete is true. If form complete is true, I'll do the alert message that we had, the pop-up right up there. And then return form complete. So that's going to send the true or false back to our on submit, which is right there, which will then trigger it to either submit or not. And so that's how that's all tied together and working. So hopefully that helps make some sense out of this whole process.